What would happen if everyone stopped lying for a week? Picture this. You wake up on a random Monday morning in America and discover that somehow, for reasons nobody can explain, lying has become impossible. Not that people chose to be honest. Lying is literally impossible. Every word that comes out of anyone's mouth is absolute truth. No filters, no diplomacy, no little white lies that keep our social machinery running smoothly. Imagine you're having your morning coffee when your spouse looks at you and says, I really can't stand the way you chew cereal. That crunching sound has irritated me for years, but I never had the guts to tell you. And before you can even process that bombshell, your teenage daughter comes downstairs and announces, "Mom? Dad? I got high at Jessica's party last Saturday and I loved it. I'm definitely doing it again." The first few days would be social apocalypse. Social. Media would completely collapse. Picture Instagram, where every influencer suddenly starts admitting they hate their own products, that their perfect lives are carefully constructed lies, that they're depressed and addicted to online validation. Hey followers, I need to confess something. I don't actually use any of these skincare products I promote. My skin is terrible without filters and Photoshop, and I'm making money off your insecurities. Love relationships would be devastated overnight. Couples who seemed happy would suddenly confront brutal truths. I've been faking orgasms for 3 years. I still think about my ex every single day. I married you for financial security, not love. Dating apps would become battlefields of honesty. You're attractive, but not attractive enough for a serious relationship. Or, I'm only here for casual sex because I'm terrified of emotional intimacy. Corporate America would end as we know it. Monday morning meetings would turn into group therapy sessions. Your company's CEO would walk into the boardroom and say, "Everyone, our company is failing because I have no idea what I'm doing. I inherited this position from my father, and I've had imposter syndrome for 10 years. Managers would admit they only promote people they personally like, regardless of competence. Jennifer, you didn't get promoted because you remind me of my ex-wife, and that makes me uncomfortable." Now imagine what would happen to politicians. In a week without lies, the entire American political system would collapse. Congressmen would live on C-SPAN, that they vote based on whoever pays the most for their campaigns. Dear constituents, I honestly didn't read this bill. My aide told me to vote yes because our donors want it that way. The president would appear on national television saying, "Americans, I need to be honest, half my decisions are based on how they'll make me look in the media. I don't fully understand the economic implications of the policies I implement." But here's where it gets interesting. What if this brutal honesty started revealing truths we actually need to hear? What if we discovered that most people, deep down, share the same fears, insecurities, and desires? After the initial shock, something extraordinary would begin to happen. People would discover that their deepest insecurities are universal. That Wall Street executive who always seemed to have everything under control would admit, "I cry in the office bathroom at least twice a week. I'm terrified I'm not good enough." And she'd discover that 3 of her colleagues do exactly the same thing. Picture the confessions on American college campuses. Students would admit they're completely lost about the future, that they chose their majors to impress their parents, that they're drowning in anxiety and depression, but pretended to be fine because everyone else seemed to have it all figured out. "I don't know why I'm pre-med. I hate blood and faint in hospitals, but my Asian parents have been pushing me since I was 5. Parents would start admitting their darkest truths. "I love my children, but sometimes I regret having kids. I miss my freedom and I resent them for taking it away." And they'd discover that practically every parent has felt this way, but nobody ever had the courage to say it out loud. Here's a disturbing truth. Many relationships would end, but the ones that survived would become incredibly stronger. Couples would be forced to confront real problems instead of sweeping everything under the rug. "I feel like you haven't really listened to me in years. would lead to actual conversations about communication. I'm sexually unsatisfied would force honest discussions about intimacy. Fake friendships would disappear instantly. I pretend to like you because you have connections that could help me professionally. But real friendships would deepen in incredible ways. You're one of the only people who makes me feel like I can be completely myself. And you? Can you imagine looking in the mirror and admitting your own truths? That you're sometimes motivated by envy? That you've sabotaged other people to feel better about yourself? That you have prejudices you prefer not to acknowledge? The American healthcare system would be forced to confront its own lies. Doctors would admit, I prescribe antidepressants because it's faster than therapy, and my healthcare system pressures me to see more patients per hour. Therapists would confess, sometimes I don't know how to help my patients, and I pretend I do, so I don't lose credibility. But imagine the positive side. People would discover that talking about mental health isn't taboo when everyone's doing it. The silent epidemic of depression, anxiety, and loneliness would finally be openly acknowledged. I feel completely isolated even when surrounded by people would become normal conversation, not a shameful secret. The American economic system would go through a crisis followed by a revolution. Companies would be forced to admit their products are unnecessary or harmful. Our soda is literally causing diabetes and obesity, but we keep marketing to children because profit matters more than public health. Digital influencers would have nervous breakdowns. I hate my life. I have to pretend to be happy 24/7 to keep my followers. I'm addicted to online validation, and my self-worth depends entirely on likes. But then something interesting would happen. Audiences would start connecting with this honesty in ways they never connected. With fake perfection, authenticity would become the new social currency. The American education system would be forced to confront its own lies. Teachers would admit, half of what we teach is irrelevant to real life, but we follow the curriculum because that's what the system requires. Students would confess, I'm not learning anything, just memorizing for tests and forgetting everything afterward. Universities would have to admit they're more businesses than educational institutions. We charge $60,000 a year because we can, not because education is worth that much. We know you'll graduate with decades of debt, but this brutal honesty would force a complete overhaul of the educational system. Here's where it would get really uncomfortable. People would be forced to admit prejudices they normally hide. I cross the street when I see a black man at night. I assume women are less competent at math. I judge poor people as lazy. But this brutal honesty could also be the beginning of a real conversation about prejudice. When everyone admits they have unconscious biases, it becomes possible to work on them instead of pretending they don't exist. Employers would admit, I hire people who look like me because I feel more comfortable with them. I pay women less because I know I can get away with it. This forced honesty could lead to real structural changes. After the initial chaos, something magical would start to happen. People would discover that vulnerability creates real connection. When everyone stops pretending they're fine, when everyone admits their flaws and fears, genuine compassion emerges. Imagine neighbors admitting, I feel lonely and I'd like to get to know you better, but I'm afraid of being rejected. Suddenly, entire communities would start connecting in real ways. I feel lonely too. How about we grab coffee? Families would confront decades of unspoken resentments, but they'd also discover love that always existed but was never expressed. I was always jealous of you because Mom and Dad praised you more. I had no idea. I always thought you were the favorite. Religious leaders would be forced to admit their own crises of faith. Sometimes I doubt God's existence, but I can't admit that because it's my job to have faith. Congregations would discover that everyone struggles with doubt, that faith isn't absolute certainty but a daily choice despite uncertainties. people would admit, I pretend to be religious because my family expects it, but I'm actually agnostic. Or, I have deep faith, but I'm afraid to express it because people will judge me as a fanatic. Here's the question that will haunt you. What would happen on the 8th day, when the ability to lie returned? Some people would desperately rush to rebuild their lies, to restore their social masks. That was just a weird week. Let's pretend none of it happened. But other people would have tasted something they could never untaste. That honesty, however painful, creates deeper connections than any comfortable lie. They would choose to keep being honest, not because they're forced to, but because they discovered that truth, even brutal truth, is liberating. Relationships that survived Truth Week would become unbreakable. Friendships forged in brutal honesty would last forever. People who confronted their inner demons would emerge stronger and more self-aware. And you? After imagining all this, after visualizing your own life being stripped of all the small and large lies we tell ourselves and others, would you choose to live with more honesty? Or would you run back to the comfort of social lies? Can you imagine admitting to your boss that you hate your job? To your family that you feel suffocated by their expectations? To your friends that you sometimes feel envious of their success? To yourself that you're not the person you pretend to be? The truth is, we all live by lying. Small lies, big lies, lies by omission, lies to protect feelings, lies to protect our ego. But a week without lies would reveal something profound about human nature. We're all more alike in our failures and fears than in our achievements and successes. And maybe, just maybe, we discover that brutal honesty, despite being painful, is the only path to real human connections. That confessing our imperfections is more liberating than pretending perfection. That being vulnerable is braver than being invulnerable. The question that remains is, would you need a supernatural force to stop lying, or could you choose honesty on your own? And if you could, what kind of life would you build on the foundation of absolute truth? Think about this the next time you're about to tell a harmless little white lie, because maybe the question isn't what would happen if everyone stopped lying for a week, but what would happen if you stopped lying to yourself for just one day?